Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's start getting back in here. Okay, we are back in session. Mr. Chappelle, sorry to keep you waiting, but thank you very much for giving us time to change that tape. We appreciate it.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Council. I'm Steve Chappelle, the Executive Director of the Suisun Resource Conservation District. I was a member of the Delta Vision. I currently have a seat on the Delta Conservancy, and I've been an active participant for the last decade in the development of the Suisun Marsh Habitat Management, Preservation, and Restoration Plan. The Marsh Plan is a comprehensive management plan for the next 30 years to address the conflicts regarding the existing managed wetland operations, long-term management and operations of those resources, and the future tidal restoration of 5,000 to 7,000 acres of habitats in the marsh. In January, we received a letter from Delta Council staff saying that the marsh plan may not be consistent with the current draft of the Delta plan. This letter was not only a surprise to me, but
that followed the December 2010 letter commenting on the plan and the environmental impact report, did it not?
That is correct.
Okay.
So the letter stated that the marsh plan may not be consistent. The principal agencies in the marsh plan include the Fish and Wildlife Service, Endangered Species Branch, they are the NEPA lead with the Bureau of Reclamation, the California Department of Fish and Game as the CEQA lead. The document, we feel, is not only consistent with the co-equal goals, but meets the biological objectives of the Delta Reform Act, the listed of bullets of contributing to the recovery of listed species, migrational corridors. It's also consistent with the Water Code sections 2832C and 2832E6, which are to promote viable populations of native resident migratory species, functional corridors, diverse biological and appropriate habitats and processes, and habitat necessary to avoid net loss of migratory birds, and where feasible, increase migratory bird habitat to promote viable populations of migratory birds. The marsh plan is comprehensive. My concern is that the letter outlines the fact that ongoing operations in the marsh and management of seasonal wetlands may be consistent with ERP Policy 3, because seasonal wetland management operations could cause oxidation and reduction of peat soils and further subsidence on areas that may be targeted for future restoration. If you use that same context and look at all intertidal areas around the delta, ag lands, any agricultural practices that are not restoring these sites to tidal wetlands would also be inconsistent with that ERP policy. When I read the draft plan and the interpretation of staff of how that policy would be implemented, it made it clear to me that this would have an effect on existing land use throughout the delta, and the existing EIR four-year delta plan does not address the implementation of that policy and the impact on existing land uses on any lands that may cause subsidence. So with that, the Resource Conservation District drafted a letter saying that the EIR, as it currently is described, is inadequate to address the effects to the existing wetland and wildlife resources in Suisun Marsh.
Now, you're talking about the ERP3, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, members, that appears on page 117 of your fifth draft Delta plan. Yeah. Okay. P2 is habitat map, and the second map, and P3 is actions other than habitat restoration.
The policy, let's see, I have it here, states actions other than habitat restoration. Mm-hmm. So in my world, habitat restoration includes enhancement and restoration of managed wetlands. So when we talk about definitions, under this provision, as I understand it and is addressed in the letter, is habitat restoration is tidal restoration. It's not, we are restoring habitats to support multi-species. So if an activity for tidal restoration is included in amended local agency or land use, shall demonstrate that they have, in conclusion with the Department of Fish and Game, avoided or mitigated in Delta the adverse effects and opportunities for habitat restoration at the elevations shown in Figure 5-2, page 117. That's the Fish and Game map. So any activity that is occurring, well, under your covered actions, routine maintenance and operations are exempt.
Mr. Ray, you've been working on this issue. Do you want to do a summary, or do we want to set this for a future discussion? I think the council doesn't have anything. There have been 2 letters sent out, if I remember correctly, December 2010, outlining the 4 points that were given to us by our science program of concern in the plan. And then there was a letter back from you. Or I'm sorry, then you completed the planning process, and the staff reviewed the completed process. Instead, it was still had scientific problems. And in my recollection of the 2010 letter, since we don't have a Delta plan, they were comparing you to the provisions of our enabling statute. Correct? That's my.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
I looked at that letter a little while ago, and
I think we all, we've met with Steve and the other principals in early January, and we'll be meeting with them, with Steve again, and I think Supervisor Reagan in next week. There's no doubt, one that Sassoon's incredibly important. It's the area with some of the best opportunities to contribute to the recovery of the species that are so important, both to the biological opinions of control pumps as well as to the restoration of the region's ecology. We had the one important point to remember here is that the reason management of the waterfowl management areas, the duck clubs, could become a covered action is because the Sassoon Marsh Plan in part directs and related permits direct the use of public monies to help the duck clubs carry out the rose management activities. These are funds that are contributed by the state and federal water contractors, and so one of the issues is that we want to make sure we understand as we try to resolve this is the flexibility to use those funds, and the water contractors in their comments on the plan had asserted that their obligation had been met. No additional funds would be needed. So if there's no public money involved, the council will have no oversight of the management of the duck clubs. And that's the case with the farmlands in the Delta, too. Of course, if you're doing private action on private land with private money, there's no consistency certification needs to be required. And so in part, I think the council's involvement in this is part of that question is money being spent on the right priorities. There are science programs, engineers and environmental scientists have raised some questions about how the implementation of the update to the management plan would affect opportunities for restoration in Sassoon. We've got a situation where if continued management contributes to subsidence and at the same time seas continue to rise, the restoration opportunities within this area that's so essential to the recovery of the Bay Delta ecosystem could grow increasingly limited. And it becomes especially important because of recommendations we received from local governments and the Delta Protection Commission, among others, that we target restoration first to existing public lands. And some of the largest sections of public lands are Fish and Game's waterfowl management areas, the Grizzly Island and Joyce Island and Sassoon. And so we want to understand how all these pieces fit together. Right now, we, as the chair has pointed out, we provided comments to the RC&D and the other management partners at Sassoon over a year ago, and you'll see that our comments that we sent back in January are almost identical, except for pointing out the concerns about the Delta Plan policies. So from our point of view, this is an opportunity where we tried to make our concerns clear and weren't addressed. The partners proceeded.
I would disagree. They were addressed. And
here we are now trying to work it out. Well, we'd like to work it out too, but right now our priority is let's get the Delta Plan done. We've got the BDCP moving ahead. We're trying to make sure we get in comments on the scoping of the water board's activity, as well as we're trying to work with this. And so we're trying to address this with the RC&D and the other partners. One of the advantages of working on real projects like this at the same time you're considering the policies and a plan you're drafting is to see how those two interplay. And so one of the key issues that we're struggling with is, and that we will as we continue to work on this, is what do we mean about in policy ERP3? How would this actually work? And what will Fish and Game have to say about what, if any, mitigation would be appropriate in this situation? So there's a number of complicated things that we're trying to work through, and I think it'll just take us a little bit of time.
Mr. Chappelle, we do not have a Delta plan now, as you know. We have draft Delta plans. Is it your opinion that if there were in existence a legal Delta plan today, this would be a covered action?
In my opinion, the Marsh Plan was drafted to be a covered action.
Would be.
Would be.
Okay.
And
And then we go through the process of determining. Are you asking us kind of in advance to go through that process? I don't know what you're asking.
I guess I was surprised that in the absence of a Delta plan, that staff felt compelled to draft a letter to our process with the final EIR, and we'll be moving forward with implementation. I can tell you today there are lands that are acquired by the state and federal water contractors that are going to be restored to tidal wetlands, contributing to the recovery of listed species, consistent with the Marsh Plan, consistent with your objectives. Yet there's public funds there. So I'm looking at the implementation of your ERP policy 3 and how you can say that any dollars or reclamation district activity or fishing game's ongoing management in the marsh is inconsistent with the Delta plan when we have 50,000 acres of this resource that has to be maintained in the future, understanding that there's going to be restoration and ongoing activities.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. When you invited us to come down and tour the marsh and meet and examine the plans and all of that, I was under the impression you were asking us to consider it favorably and hopefully include it in the Delta plan.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then back in 2010, you got the letter which did not reference the Delta plan. It referenced the statute. And the statute is independent of, it's the foundation of a plan, but this statute stands as state policy. And why did you object to us writing the letter in 2010 that pointed out there were, I think, 4 issues identified, if I remember correctly, and that they had raised questions. One of them you'd raised, that some of the configurations of what you're planning to do might lead to further oxidation of the soil and subsidence. That's my remembering of one. The second was the dividing of the Suisun Marsh into 4 roughly equal units and putting 1/4 of the environmental work in each segment, which was concerned about whether that satisfied connected habitat and maximum opportunity or not. I mean, there were 2 others, and I don't remember them at this time.
I think, so your letter in 2010 was a comment letter on our draft EIR. The NEPA and CEQA leads, including Fish and Game, the Fish and Wildlife Service with the Tidal Marsh Recovery Plan as the foundation of our plan, addressed your letters, modified the final, and finalized the EIR.
Well, you do know that the letter Mr. Ray signed, I guess, a month ago or whenever in the dickens it was, said that at least 3.5 of the issues were not addressed adequately, which is the kind of way comments go in this process.
Well, it's obviously there is a disconnect between staff's opinion and the principal agencies.
What would you like us to do?
I think there's a need for dialogue.
Okay.
And that dialogue, other than one meeting where I was told that the letter was drafted and I should provide comments to the council on the adequacy of your EIR and the effects of your policies, that's why I'm here today. I'm not representing the principal agencies. I think that the issues that were addressed, 3/4 of them are easily addressed with dialogue and a common understanding.
I have no reason to doubt that that's true.
But I fear that the ERP policy, as staff has implied in your letter, is a nexus to local land use across the marsh and would have negative effects on the existing resources that are not disclosed in your EIR.
Well, okay, I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't. You've obviously
the
raised
Resource
it.
Conservation District letter lays out the.
Okay, well, let us look at the
That
issue.
rationale.
Let us look at the issue.
And we will evaluate that
Yeah,
as
okay.
part of the EIR.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, sir. Okay, any other slips, Pat? No. Anyone else in the audience like to speak to us? Okay. 5 minutes after 1, we will be back here in 2 weeks with revised matrix, whatever configurations we've talked about. Joe, just off the top of your head, that is the main focus of the next 2 days of meetings, is it not? Turn your mic on, Joe. I think you turned.
I turned it off. I'm sorry. We will also have a report from our lead scientist who was unable to be here today.
Okay,
So-
question. Can you? How do you plan to walk through at the next meeting? I want to have some sense. If it's just a matrix, part of me says we don't need 2 days. But if it's more than that, and I suspect it will be more than that, what have you got in mind?
We're still catching our breath from this morning, but I'm thinking that it will be the matrix. It will have alternatives. It will have excerpts from comments. In some cases, though, the range of alternatives is substantial. In other cases, it's not so wide. And so, I guess my preference would be to plan on 2 days, and if we get done in one, we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Let me just ask the members, and Don, you and Hank, you have all kinds of commitments elsewhere. If the agenda is restricted to some minor housekeeping business and going through the revised matrix, actually getting policy preferences by the council, my gut tells me that's a full day. Might be a long day, but that's a full day. Which would be better for you, a Friday or a Thursday? If it's Thursday, of course, if we run into problems, we can continue it, but,
Thursday, I'm booked up in Houston at MD Anderson all day.
So Friday would be better for you.
If I can get a flight
Okay.
late Thursday
Don?
night.
Either day. I've got those both blocked off on my calendar. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so either day.
Pat? Felicia?
Thursday would be preferable, but
Okay.
I'll
Felicia?
do
What do you-
whatever you do.
Okay. Randy?
How about Saturday? I got both days blocked.
Okay, so do I. Let's do this. Let's do Thursday, but if first of all, give Gloria notification ASAP. And if you believe that you could get it completed in a long single meeting, then we tell council members that and all that. But if we have to, if we're ready for all that, are we ready for all that? Are we going to have, Lauren, are we going to have the definitive report and study on science stuff?
The island priorities that Joe was going to provide, Hank, and Hank was going to report back.
It's a list of a list of facilities and factors, and we will have that. I think Eric's already showed me some of the work they've got underway, so I think we will have that. We are not going to have the priorities for the islands. We are going to have
The categories or
Yeah.
potential range of issues.
we could have that conversation.
Okay, let's keep it advertised for 2 days.
But let's
and-
focus on what we need to do for the Delta plan. That's really
Right.
our key.
Okay, let's advertise it for 2 days and hope to end it in one.
Cindy has reminded me, too, that at the Delta Conservancy's request, we had offered Campbell Ingram a chance to come talk to you during the next meeting about their draft strategic plan for the Conservancy's operations.
You got to turn your microphone on.
Sorry, I think we should do what we need to do, especially having missed the last meeting. And
Okay.
If we leave early Friday.
2 days,
if we
2
leave
days.
early Friday.
2 days. Okay. All right. Anything else, Mr. Grindstaff? Mr. Ray?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just introducing a concept. I've always found it good governance to have a self-assessment of committees and groups of people.
Right.
How are we doing? Is there anything we could improve upon? The things we're doing well and all the rest of that. I think we ought to do that. Think about it for a while and then have a session. And whether
Okay.
it's going to be 15 minutes or half an hour. whether it's going to be the next meeting or the meeting after that, just to assess ourselves and our performance.
Okay.
Any reaction?
Randy?
I think that's a good idea, and I bet you've got a form available that
Me?
you could.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a processor.
I bet you know somebody that
substance
has
guy.
a form.
He knows people who know people.
Hey, Mr. Nordhoff, I wonder if you could give us an exhaustive list of all potential.
When do you want it?
We will do that. Thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned.